Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the show. How are we doing?
What's up?
My name is Matthew Perdomo, SimbaofSports, and today you got another great show of Friends of Five brought to you by 5 Reasons Sports Network. Before we get to our show, just a quick reminder for everybody. Follow us on Twitter. Make sure you follow us our YouTube page, subscribe to the page, click on those notifications. We got tons of great videos. Get onto our 5 Reasons Sports Network. We got tons of awesome shirts. And that's pretty much it. So my name is Matthew Perdomo.
Alrighty, and I'm Ryan Lasner, LasnerSport, and we have a very special guest. Jared Weiss from The Athletic. He is a Celtics staff writer. Welcome to the show, Mr. Jared.
This is great. I've always wanted multiple friends. To get 5 at the same time, I mean, this is incredible.
Exactly. Well, and you'll get more friends from this show. But let's just jump right into it.
Oh, okay? I can only handle 5. Let's.
Okay, all right. We'll cap it at 5, maybe 6. Depends how people comment. But so you've covered the Celtics from the time that Miami had their big three with LeBron, right? So
my first season covering the Celtics was like that year when LeBron destroyed them in the conference finals. So I'm very excited for this to come back.
It's a little bit of animosity there. Any fear for this team, this roster at all, for the Miami Heat's roster?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they're not quite as good as that team was. That team was like one of the best teams we've ever seen. But yeah, I mean, the Celtics should definitely be scared of this Miami team. Spoelstra, as good of a coach as he was back then, now he's, arguably the best coach in the NBA going. If Pop retires, maybe we could probably say that. I mean, he's one of the best coaches in the NBA. He's devised this offense built around Bam that Jimmy can also run, where it still has so many similar principles. And the roster is so deep with guys that fit into the scheme and guys that bring something a little bit different, but not so different that they can't, kind of have that flexibility in the scheme. So their offense is really tantalizing. I don't know how deadly it's going to be against the Celtics defense, because the Celtics defense is probably the best in the league at this point. And, I mean, it's going to be a great game planning battle of the teams finding different ways to shut each other's, kind of core principles down on offense, just like we saw in that last round with Toronto and Boston. Because I assume you guys and most of the people here were watching mostly that Miami-Milwaukee series. And that was a series where Miami showed that they could kick Milwaukee's ass based on the way that Milwaukee plays. And Milwaukee waited way too long to adjust. They weren't even really able to fit until Giannis was gone. But obviously Milwaukee without Giannis just doesn't really score that much. Right. But Boston, they can do everything that Milwaukee was supposed to do. And they have so many guys that can create their own looks that you can't just take one guy away and everything falls apart. So this is going to be it's crazy to say that, because I thought Milwaukee was probably going to win the title. But we just saw that when you get to the playoffs, Milwaukee can get exposed easily. You can't do that to Boston.
Gotcha.
So, what player would you say you're most worried about on the Heat roster?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's the thing is, like, the Heat roster has like 8 guys that are pretty much just as good as each other. Give or take.
List off a few guys.
Yeah, I definitely know who it is. I mean, I guess Bam, just because they have guys that can guard Jimmy, like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Marcus Smart. Those guys can handle that assignment. Even they could bring in Shemi Ojale. He could probably guard Jimmy Butler decently well, especially because Jimmy Butler, you could basically sit back on him a little bit and try to get him to take mid-range shots, and they're fine if he's hitting those shots. It's all about stopping him from getting into the paint. Once Jimmy Butler's in the paint, the defense is completely screwed at that point. He's gonna either get an assist or he's gonna score. So I think Bam is the hard part. It's that Bam, for one, his playmaking has just been so deadly in the playoffs. These guys are just they know how to cut off of his screens. He knows how to roll to be a lob threat. They can work through the post and kind of run some triangle stuff with him. There's just so many different ways that they can utilize Bam. So I feel like Bam is actually more dynamic than Jimmy is at this point, as far as how they run the offense through him. And they're going to have Tice on him, and Tice is a really good matchup because he has the size and the technique. But if they're running pick and rolls and Adebayo is going through the lane, they can throw it up there, and Tice isn't going to be able to quite get where Adebayo is, and it's going to be an alley-oop fest. And if that happens, then you got to put Time Lord out there. And while Time Lord can do some amazing stuff in the air, he can also be taken advantage of because he's a really raw defender at this point. So if Bam is playing his best, that's where the Celtics don't have a clear answer the way that they do, or multiple answers the way that they do with Jimmy.
Nice. And I saw in the regular season, it seems like you had 3 guys that were averaging 20 points a game with Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Kemba Walker. How can Miami stop those 3 20-point shooters, 20 points a game guys? How can that even happen?
Well, and you got Marcus Smart, who's scoring 20 it seems, every other night at this point. So,
Okay.
And then maybe Hayward comes back. I think if Hayward even makes it back into the series, he'll kind of be like a 6-man off the bench for the most part, just because he won't be that healthy. But he'll provide some shooting at the very least. And so, I mean, they match up well. Here's Miami's major weakness is that they don't have they only have 2 great two-way players. Bam and Jimmy are great two-way players. Everyone else is a bit of a compromise. Jay Crowder is maybe the closest thing they have to a two-way player, but he's a streaky shooter. He can be really, when he's hot, he's really good. And he can attack off the dribble. He's been pretty decent at that, but he doesn't really play make that much. He's not that good of a finisher. He's a little limited in what he can do. But then when you get to guys like Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero and Kendrick Nunn, and even Goran Dragic, who I've always loved his game, and I'm really glad that he didn't end up going anywhere. These are all guys that can either be taken advantage of on defense or are going to be a little bit limited on offense. Well, I guess those are all guys that can be taken advantage of on defense. Same thing, and then Andre Iguodala, great defender, isn't really shooting that well anymore. Doesn't really play make that well anymore. So, Kelly Olynyk, a little bit of both. But so the point is, you go up and down the Heat roster, and these are all really talented offensive players, but there's only so many people that they can put on these perimeter scorers. And Spoelstra will have to really sacrifice offensive firepower if he wants to get lineups out there that can actually guard all those guys, hence why they play so much zone. Playing zone mitigates the impact of having guys that aren't good one-on-one matchups and man-to-man coverage, but the Celtics offense knows how to pick apart a zone pretty well.
I know you mentioned Gordon Hayward. So how realistic is it that he comes in? What's the timeline looking like? Because from what I'm thinking, maybe after 2 games he can start seriously maybe getting in, but what is it that you see?
So I'm thinking probably more like games 4, maybe after game 4 is when we could see him in there. And I'm assuming this series is going 6 or 7. I'd be shocked if it was shorter than that either way. But barring another injury, obviously. But so Hayward, it's hard to tell, but he has been kind of pretty steadily ramping up his activity level over the past 4 or 5 days. He was participating in kind of like more full activity stuff in practice today, but he's like just getting back to practicing at this point. So the idea of him playing in a playoff game on a sprained ankle, this isn't like a wrist injury where you can compensate for this. This is a severe ankle sprain, which means literally tearing of the ligaments and stuff like that. So you can't mess around, and you could re-injure this really easily. So they have to be really cautious. And then it certainly seems like his plan is still to go back out of the bubble for the birth of his son, which is supposed to be happening like pretty much any day now. And if that happens, that's like probably about 6 days out of basketball activity at that point, because a couple days away, then he comes back, he has to quarantine for 4 days. So that's a week off of not actively working with the team to try to rehab while he's trying to get back, which means that while he'll have more healing time, really he seems to be kind of past that initial healing stage. And right now it's all about kind of ramping up and building up strength. So the idea of him coming back even within 2 weeks from now seems pretty far-fetched. And I think we're looking at maybe, the very tail end of this series, he could be coming back.
Nice. So Jason Tatum, I feel like he's getting some comparison to Kobe Bryant because of, him working out with him and having that relationship. So that's where his ceiling, that's where he wants to be. I would, unless you think there's somebody else, but who is Jaylen Brown? Who's his comp, would you say?
I had Paul George as his comp coming out of the draft. Okay. There definitely is a lot to say that, the similarities with Paul George. Paul George developed a super tight handle. It took him a long time to get there, and Jaylen Brown's made a ton of progress, but when he got to the league, he could barely even dribble to begin with. He used to dribble it off of his foot in transition, stuff like that. It was really bad. But I think Paul George is probably a pretty good comp for him still. Kawhi Leonard is another good one. But that's like the absolute high-end potential of what he can do. I mean, Kawhi Leonard obviously is one of the greatest players of all time. So, but as far as like kind of similarities in the way that they play, I think that both of those guys have, there's more similarities there. I would probably even argue Tatum is more similar to a lot of those guys as far as their actual individual playmaking skills that they've shown this year. Jalen's become kind of unique lately because he's a very rare type of player in that he plays off ball for the most part, and he's incredibly deadly attacking the rim and spotting up for three. He doesn't play on ball as much anymore, so maybe we kind of have to change the way that we look at him a little bit. But it's also just kind of the fit that he's fitting next to Tatum, who's much more of an on ball player. So, now that I think about it, I don't know if those comps really even work nearly as well as they used to. But if you put Jalen on Miami, he would probably have the ball in his hands a ton because the offense would need him. So, he's filling his role, and his role's pretty sweet. He basically camps out and spreads the floor, or he cuts. He kind of plays like a Miami shooting guard right now. He's playing, in many ways, a very similar role to like what Tyler Hero is doing, except that when you give him the ball, he can literally jump over anybody in the world and dunk it on their head, which is why Jaylen Brown's a very good basketball player.
Nice.
I know that Celtics play like a very switchy offense, right? Like they try to pick apart a team, and they try to switch off the better defenders. Who's a player that the Celtics are going to look not to try to go up against? Is it going to be Bam? Is it going to be Jimmy? Who are they trying to? I know one of the games we saw them go at the fourth quarter, they kept trying to switch on to Duncan Robinson. Specifically, Gordon Hayward would keep switching until he got Duncan Robinson on him, and then he went off on one of those games, specifically in the fourth quarter. So who is a player on the Heat that the Celtics specifically probably trying to want to avoid, not to go up against them?
I mean, you don't want to switch Crowder onto you. I mean, unless you're like Kemba Walker, where you probably have the speed to get past Crowder. This is going to be really interesting to see if Iggy still has it, because these guys are they're way more explosive than Milwaukee. They're way better ball handlers. They can attack and actually get to the rim and finish. And this is going to really put Iggy to the test. And we expect Iguodala to really be able to bring it in the series because he has such little load on him. He's played so little over the past year. So you would hope that he still has, enough left in the tank there. But then, I mean, any of the perimeter guys on Miami are all targetable, whether it's Hero, whether it's Robinson, especially Kendrick Nunn. I almost said Dunn, not Chris Dunn, Kendrick Nunn. Similar initials. But so all those guys are really targetable. I actually don't expect to see a lot of Nunn out there, just because point guard defense is so vital in the series. And Dragic is already a kind of mediocre point guard defender, but he's such a great offensive player that you need him out there. So I think that pretty much all those guys will get targeted. Olynyk probably to a degree, but I've always been a very strong supporter of Olynyk's defense. I've always thought his defense is very underrated. People see a goofy white guy and they think that he's slow and sluggish, but his technique is really good.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's games where Kelly Olynyk bites that fake so badly, and he's like 10 feet in the air, and I'm like, "What are you doing, man?"
Which is funny because his whole problem is he used to always pump fake and then not shoot the ball, and he would drive people crazy because he had the yips. But yeah, so all those guys, there's a ton of guys that they could target, frankly, and that's why I feel like Boston has the upper hand here. It's just that we've seen so many times at the end of these playoff games, it devolves into matchup hunting on switches and isolation play. And the Celtics have those guys, and they have targets that they can go up against. And like we were saying before, Miami, at the end of the games, they have to didn't Duncan Robinson not play at the end of the last game for the fourth quarter?
Play the fourth quarter so much. It's more a Tyler Hero has that role of the 3-point.
Yeah, so because they have to get Crowder, they have to get Iggy out there, and that's a huge compromise.
Yeah.
It changes the types of plays that you can run. It changes obviously just like how much can the defense sag off of you. Like the Celtics are going to sag off of Jay Crowder because they're going to want to focus on protecting Bam Adebayo from rolling and targeting guys like Hero and Duncan Robinson. So Jay Crowder's probably going to get left open if he's out there. Kendrick Nunn is probably going to get left open. Right. Obviously, no one's going to guard Iguodala. So. There are more compromises that Miami has to make than what Boston has to make.
Gotcha. And so Miami fans, we're going to hate Marcus Smart by game 3 or so, right? Is this the biggest concern? I mean, like of the players that Miami could hate, it could be Kemba Walker because he's just deadly with shooting and drawing fouls. But do you think we're going to hate Marcus Smart?
Yeah, of course. You should hate Marcus Smart because Marcus Smart wants you to hate him.
Yeah.
because he's going to be guarding Jimmy Butler, and he's going to frustrate the hell out of Jimmy Butler, and they're going to jaw at each other. And every Heat fan is going to be like, "How dare you go at my sweet, precious, innocent Jimmy Butler?" So, and, I mean, like I remember in the playoffs when Jimmy was in Chicago, and him and Marcus got into it, and Jimmy said he ain't about that life, which was for some reason the most like offensive thing you could say to Marcus Smart, who grew up in a Jimmy Butler has a rough backstory, so does Marcus. These guys are clearly about that life. Marcus, obviously people can't say Marcus because of all the grifting, as we like to call it grifting up in Boston. We try to have fun with it. But all the flopping and stuff like that, all of the ridiculous things he does to try to draw fouls. And to Jimmy Butler's credit, Jimmy Butler is hyper physical, doesn't really flop. He gets to the line a ton because he's so smooth with the ball, so smooth when he picks up the ball and kind of extends his Euro steps, and he throws his body into people and he can finish through that contact. And he's one of the best at it. That's why Butler's one of the best players in the game. Marcus isn't quite at that talent, but he is kind of a similar player in many ways to what Jimmy is. And so maybe at the end of the series, people will start to begrudgingly respect Marcus Smart because they'll see how similar of a player he is.
Right.
But there's going to be a lot of people that just resent Marcus for the way that he plays, and Marcus knows that.
Okay.
This is not a real question, but like, do you get a
give you
little
a fake
annoyed?
answer.
Did you get a little annoyed when he does the flopping, Marcus Smart?
Well, so obviously, like you see some of it, and you're like, "What the hell are you doing, man?" Like it's ridiculous. I think it's funny. Like people get so mad at me on Twitter.
Well, because it's not against you; it's against every other team. Obviously, you wouldn't get mad if the guy's on your team.
Well, I mean, if I see people like I was just covering the Raptors series, and Kyle Lowry is flopping all over the place, and I think it's hilarious. I love it because I don't care. I'm a journalist. I don't care what the Celtics win or lose or not. I'm just along for the ride, and so. Obviously I enjoy when they win and I get to keep covering the NBA conference finals and hopefully the finals. It's fun for me for work. But like at the end of the day, I'm just there to watch the game and analyze it. I don't care if the Celtics win at the end of the day. But especially if you're an opponent and you are rooting for your team and you see Marcus Smart doing like the one against Marcus Sol where he went up and grabbed a rebound and Marcus Sol was like behind him when he landed and he just like kind of like let himself go and just like fell to the ground. And there's one point where he's like doing like a pose towards the camera. Like, yeah, I would be infuriated if I saw that and I was a Raptors fan. So the Heat fans are going to do that tons. No question about it. They're going to be absolutely livid with him. But you gotta recognize you're the Heat. You have the Don and Pat Riley. Like you guys are it's all about gamesmanship with the Heat. They've been doing it for years. People are mad at the Heat for ruining the NBA by forming the Big Three. It's like the Heat have long been the villains. And villains real should recognize real when it comes to that kind of stuff. So I hope that Heat fans enjoy this stuff because it's hilarious, man.
Do you think the Heat still are the villains in the NBA?
No, now they're the beloved underdog. Are you kidding?
Oh yeah,
they got all the scrappy white guys. They're the scrappy hustle team now. And they're so much fun to watch. They're led by Jimmy Butler, which obviously it's going to turn a lot of people off, but. If you're a basketball fan, you should love Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler is like the ultimate grit and grind dude. Like he literally, and I mean, we all thought that Jimmy Butler was not like an elite player coming into the year. And now we're seeing him as the only perimeter player all-star on his team, carrying his team to the conference finals. Like Jimmy is proving he is pure winning. That's what it's all about. And he keeps getting run out of town because he wasn't in the right culture to be somewhere where people were willing to embrace who he is,
right.
How ruthless of a winner he is. And then he joined Pat Riley, and it is a match made in heaven. And it's so unbelievably entertaining. And you combine that with Bam Adebayo, who's such a unique player, and then Eric Spoelstra, who's such a brilliant coach that devises all these unique schemes, makes all these amazing adjustments. The Heat are one of the most entertaining teams to watch in basketball. Not to mention the Warriors are out this year because everyone's hurt. They're literally running the Steve Kerr system. It's the same system that the Warriors ran through Draymond Green and Kevin Durant.
Yeah,
and obviously it's beautiful basketball.
Yeah,
I love the Heat.
Brad Stevens did bring that up where the Miami was very similar to Golden State, which that was the first comparison I heard of that all season.
Did he really? Oh.
Yeah. Hey, so how does the Miami Heat win this series?
I don't know.
Because they're not, right? Your opinion.
I think the Celtics are clear favorites, but the big part is who hits the shots.
Right.
Miami's got. So Boston has 4 good offensive players, and Daniel Tice. And then that's it. So
You're not that
Miami's
deep.
got tons of offensive talent. Boston has good defensive depth. And we saw that in Toronto series where like Grant Williams came in. He had some spot up threes. He made some nice rebounds, stuff like that, but he doesn't create offense for you. But like Miami is stacked with all these guys that can hit shots, that can create off the dribble. I mean, you can divide. Eric can devise whatever kind of lineup and rotation he wants on a night to night basis, and he can really throw off Brad Stevens by the fact that Brad has kind of no idea where he's going to go once he starts digging into the bench every single night. So there's a lot of kind of gamesmanship and just like who comes in with the subs, how does that adjust your rotations, things of that nature. So yeah, for Miami, it's like they want to shoot 50 times a game and hit 20 of them. Shoot 36% from three, but hit 23s, which is like close to a record every single time. And the math will work in your favor if you can that, if you can pull it off.
So shoot him out of the courtyard or whatever they say.
I know you said that the Heat play a lot of zone. Actually, it looks like in the playoffs we're not playing that much zone anymore. It looks like now that Jay Crowder and Iguodala have learned the style of defense that Spoelstra wanted during the off time, because it looked like the off time really helped out the Heat. And like instead of like the Bucks where it really hurt them. So we play like we play a switch defense, right? I think that we'll be able to use that closer to our advantage, which will help us instead of zone against the Boston. But I noticed that the Raptors threw some zone at the Celtics, and it looked like the Celtics didn't know what to do sometimes, right? So, what do you attribute that to?
I think Miami should definitely run a lot of zone defense. And, the important thing is that zone defense and switch defense isn't that different. It's kind of more about just like your positioning, but like, if you're in a zone and two guys hand the ball off on the elbow and it's not like in your zone, you don't just like stare at them and not guard it. Like you go guard it. So in reality, if you're switching every single thing, you're kind of playing zone to a degree. But I think the big difference is that decides where your help is coming from and how you fill the lane to prevent guys from just rolling down the middle. And so Boston, they were able initially to attack downhill on Toronto, and then Toronto would have to overload, or they would expose the corners. And so Toronto switched to a lot of, they would change the zone up every like 3 possessions, but they would do like 2-1-2, for instance, which is you got, it's like the 5 on a die, die singular. There you go. But like they also would send a guy out to close out, and then they would cycle in. And so like they're constantly changing who's in what position in the zone. And that worked really well. Miami, we haven't really seen them execute that kind of zone, and that's kind of like an innovative zone. I don't know if I've ever been seen that before. And that worked really well just because Boston could never get the zone out of position and have the zone rotate all the way over and then like swing it all the way around to find an open guy. And I don't know if Miami's going to be able to execute it at that level. So maybe that could be they could expose them, but it at least allows them to have someone in the lane to make sure that those Celtics guys aren't getting too close to the paint. And it also allows you to have guys in the corner so the Celtics can't get easy 3-pointers. But obviously the risk is that you're giving up pick and roll 3-pointers, and the Celtics defense, their offense is designed to just bury pick and roll 3-pointers over and over and over again.
Nice. All right, well, we do have to finish up the show really soon. Do you want to get our last questions in?
Yeah. You last question, and I'll get a last question.
All righty. So you got like Celtics in 6. I'm feeling. Jared?
I had Celtics in 7. The more that I've done film study and preparing my scouting reports, I'm leaning more towards 6, just because everything I'm seeing in the film makes me think that the Celtics can they're definitely playing from a big advantage. But again, Miami shooters are just there's so many of them that like they could easily hit 25 threes in a game multiple times in the series, and you're not going to be able to beat a team if they're putting up 75 points just off of 3-pointers right there. So, right. There's definitely a way that Miami could win the series, but I've been surprised to see how many people are picking the Heat, just because maybe people are picking the Heat because they saw them kill the Bucks and they saw the Celtics go 7. But like anybody that watched those series saw that Toronto is like, way, way better than what Milwaukee is. Like Milwaukee was a shell of themselves, or at least what they used to be. And it was, they were much easier to dismantle as long as you had an answer for Giannis. Right. Not to mention Giannis got hurt. Like, if Giannis was healthy the whole time, he could have figured it out and turned the series around. Like that, like most star players after 2 games of getting shut down, they start to figure out a
But he
better
didn't.
solution.
He didn't get hurt after 2 games either. Let's not pretend that we didn't
That's
beat
true.
him. We beat him in 3 games, and then he couldn't play the next one. So it's not like he couldn't figure out that 3rd game either. So
Yeah, but
Early.
it wouldn't have been. I don't think it would have been such a easy gentleman's sweep. If
I
the
don't
Giannis
think
did
it was
stay
a
healthy.
I don't think it was a Giannis problem, to be honest. Though I think it was a Budenholzer problem. I think, like you said, he was reluctant to switch, and I think that Middleton's a great player. I don't think he's always meant to be the Robin to the Batman. I just think sometimes he's not a Robin. And that's okay. Not everybody's going to be playing like that all the time. It's not easy to be that position. My last question is. X factor for the Heat. I know you said Bam is probably one of those players. Is there another X factor that you're hoping not to see flourish during this, Celtics game because you think might be a real problem? What would that be?
Well, I want to see everybody flourish. I want everybody to get their Skrilla. But Bam is the obvious X factor. I guess Hero is probably the other big one because Hero, I think, can probably hold his own defensively. If he really, really plays his best. And then we just see offensively his ability to drive and kick on top of his incredible off-ball shooting ability. He opens up a lot of stuff offensively for them. So if he's able to improve enough or play at a level defensively that he can stay on the floor, he presents just, I think, more offensive value than pretty much all these guys. Even though I know Duncan Robinson is like the more renowned shooter, I think Hero has a more well-rounded game.
Definitely.
One more thing in what. All right. Do you want to see the Lakers or the Clippers in the finals? In your case,
the Lakers. Celtics Lakers finals would be so much fun. LeBron, AD, there's so many storylines there. It would be so much better.
And then also, is this the best Boston team that you think you guys can have, or what do you? What else do you need? What are you missing?
Well, they're missing Gordon Hayward, so
Okay. But if Gordon Hayward,
look at how good they. Look how good. Was that?
If they had Gordon Hayward, would this be the best Boston team that you think they could put together?
I'm pretty sure they would win the title this year if they had Gordon Hayward. Because they still might win the title, and they don't even have an borderline all-star, I guess, at this point. As far as like future moves that they can make, there are ways that they could improve the team. I don't think they have to get a center. Like Daniel Tice, pretty damn amazing on defense, and he fills his role on offense. They obviously, if they wanted to be by far the best team in the NBA, they could get somebody at the 5 that would also deliver a ton of like scoring potential and stuff like that on offense. It's hard, but like if they wanted to trade for, let's say, Miles Turner, for instance, who's someone that could be on the block, they could trade Gordon for Miles Turner, but that makes sense because Gordon Hayward's contract's about to expire. He's over 30. He's had a bunch of injuries. So even though Gordon Hayward as a big playmaking wing is a more valuable player to have in the modern NBA, Miles Turner is young, locked into a contract that's a pretty fair price, and he had a down year, so his value is low, but we've seen what he can do. So, that kind of deal makes sense, but I don't think it necessarily makes the team better than when they're at full strength with Hayward, being healthy. Because, the Celtics have been ahead of the curve of that every team in the NBA is trying to get one big man out there with a bunch of big wings that can shoot, pass, create. And that's what the Celtics do great. And when they're clicking at their best, they're the best team in the NBA.
So you're pretty confident.
Yeah. A big part of it is like Jason Tatum every 2 months hits like another level in his career. It's hard to remember back in November, he was having 1 for 18 games and he wasn't able to pass and he wasn't able to finish at the rim. Now he's putting up some of the greatest numbers in NBA history. And I don't think he was even playing that great against Toronto. Like Toronto actually did a really good job against him, but his sheer will got him to the point that he was still putting up record numbers. Like his averages of like 20 points, 10, I think it's like 25, 10 and shooting 40% from 3. The only other player in NBA history to do that played more than the first round is Dirk Nowitzki.
Wow.
Only other player in the history of the NBA. And Tatum's 22, and he's doing that. So, the sky's so insanely high for him. Kobe's a good comparison because he's putting up bigger numbers and pushing his team further into the playoffs than Kobe even did at his age.
Right.
So, Kobe then played with Shaq and a bunch of titles. I don't think the Celtics have a Shaq to pair him with. But, Tatum, what he's doing, it's historic. And Luka Doncic, sure, he's better than Tatum offensively, but Tatum's also one of the best defensive wings in the entire NBA. So he's providing value at pretty much an MVP caliber level right now. And if he keeps this up and he doesn't completely fold against Miami, I think most people are going to look at him as, he's going to be the top 50 player in NBA history at this rate.
Wow.
Well, I mean, assuming he continues to ascend at the level he
I
does.
can see that. I can see him being an all-star every single year.
Yeah. I think the question is he going to be an MVP contender every year? And it's certainly right now he's playing at a borderline MVP level. So I'd imagine he's going to continue to improve and probably get to a high level. And that's forgetting the fact that Jaylen Brown is now at this point clearly an all-star player. I mean, he's had some ups and downs, but he's an all-star. So they have great talent there. And Rob Williams has a lot of promise, and he's showing in real playoff scenarios that you can throw the ball up in the air and it doesn't matter how high you throw it, he's going to get it and he's going to dunk it, and he can make incredible plays on defense. And he's like, Rob Williams has only played like 500 minutes in his career so far because of health and roles. So he's barely even played in the NBA, or maybe it's more like 1,000, but he's barely played in the NBA, and he's already showing he can play on the floor in playoff scenarios. So they have some incredible young talent there. They have some great vets. Marcus Smart has transformed significantly as a player this year. So they have a lot going for them, and they're probably going to be one of the best teams in the league for the next at least probably 3 to 5 years.
Damn, I hope not.
Well, hopefully Miami will be great too. I hope Jimmy doesn't age horribly, and Miami's got a ton of young talent here. Bam, as good as Bam is right now, he's like not even that good of a finisher yet. Like he can't really, he doesn't really finish in the post. He doesn't shoot that much. Like Bam has so far to go. He's going to be incredible. So there's good times ahead for Miami for sure.
Yeah, of course. Well, hopefully you're wrong, and hopefully the Celtics don't win this series. Okay. It was awesome having you, man. I really appreciate it. I know Lasner loved having you on here. And hopefully maybe we can get you on again during the series. I'd probably want you on again if we're winning, because I don't know if I want to be salty,
Oh, I don't care. Yeah, throw all the salt on me. I need it.
All right, man. Well, thanks again for being on the show, man. Everybody follow us on Twitter. All three of us, we have great information on Twitter. You want to make sure you get it from us. And later, guys.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jared. Peace.
Thanks, fellas.